On the afternoon of June 9th, 2013, the high sun-baked desert of Colorado's Mesa Verde National Park became the setting for an impossibly quiet disappearance. At 51 years old, Mitchell Dale Stehling was visiting the park's historic ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings with his wife and parents. The Texas native was a structured, dependable family man, but the intense summer heat was starting to wear on the group as they traveled through the park. Wanting to squeeze one last sight into the trip, Dale decided to undertake a quick, solo hike down the paved trail leading to the Spruce Tree House ruins, while his family rested at the air-conditioned visitor center. It was a routine 10-minute walk down a heavily trafficked pathway, meant to be a brief detour before the family began their drive home. But Dale never walked back up. Today, we are tracing the final, brief steps of a man who vanished into a bustling canyon, leaving behind a heavily traveled path for a decade-long silence. The geography of the Spruce Tree House Trail is deceptive, offering a reassuring sense of security that conflicts sharply with the surrounding wilderness. The path is short, fully paved, and snakes down a modest switchback into a shallow canyon, entirely visible from multiple observation points above. Because it leads directly to one of the park's most famous and highly preserved cliff dwellings, the trail is constantly teeming with hundreds of tourists, park rangers, and families. It is an environment where privacy is nearly impossible to find, and a medical crisis would almost certainly be witnessed by dozens of passing hikers. When Dale set off from the Chapin Mesa Archaeological Museum at roughly 4:30 p.m., he was entering this heavily populated pedestrian corridor. He was dressed casually for the summer heat in a brown t-shirt, shorts, and a baseball cap, carrying nothing but his wallet and a small bottle of water. Witnesses would later confirm seeing him walking down the path, moving at a normal pace toward the ruins, seemingly unbothered by the high elevation or the 90-degree temperature. He was just a few hundred yards away from his destination, completely hemmed in by sheer sandstone cliffs and a steady stream of fellow travelers. Yet this heavily monitored canyon floor would serve as the definitive edge of Dale's known timeline. Somewhere along that short descent, during the brightest hours of a summer afternoon, Dale departed from the paved path and stepped out of the modern world. Despite the narrow architecture of the canyon and the constant presence of human eyes, nobody saw him leave the trail, stumble over a barrier, or wander into the brush. The brief distance between the visitor center and the ancient ruins simply transformed into a physical blind spot, swallowing a grown man without a single witness noticing his departure. When Dale failed to return to the visitor center after an hour, his family immediately notified park authorities, triggering what would quickly become the largest search and rescue operation in the history of Mesa Verde. Because the trail area was so tightly contained, park rangers initially expected to find a disoriented hiker who had perhaps succumbed to heat exhaustion or twisted an ankle just off the path. Within 24 hours, the containment zone was flooded with specialized tracking teams, search dogs, and search helicopters equipped with thermal imagery. Yet, this massive administrative response immediately collided with a total forensic void. Highly trained tracking hounds, brought to the paved trail where Dale was last seen, failed to secure a single definitive scent line leading into the surrounding pinyon juniper woodlands or down the canyon floors. The air and ground teams meticulously swept the rugged canyons and mesa tops for miles, but the desert terrain remained entirely a blank page, yielding no dropped water bottles, no scuff marks on the sandstone, and no physical clues. This complete lack of environmental feedback deeply baffled the search coordinators. Mesa Verde is a landscape defined by sharp topography, where a fallen hiker would typically leave fractured branches, displaced rocks, or clothing fibers along the steep ledges. The pristine, undisturbed condition of the terrain suggested that Dale had not simply wandered off and fallen down an open slope. The wilderness had absorbed him cleanly, leaving behind no forensic signature or physical footprint for the tracking teams to follow. The complete stagnation of the initial search forced investigators to look beyond the immediate tourist corridors, shifting their focus toward the treacherous, restricted backcountry of the park. Mesa Verde is defined by a series of long parallel mesas separated by deep, rugged canyons like Fuchs Canyon and Cliff Canyon. These areas are strictly off-limits to the public due to their archaeological fragility and dangerous, crumbling terrain, making them an incredibly difficult environment for an accidental wanderer to navigate. Investigators hypothesized that Dale, perhaps seeking a unique photographic angle or experiencing a sudden episode of heat-induced disorientation, had intentionally bypassed the trail boundaries. If he had pushed deep into the thick, thorny underbrush of the mesa tops, he could have easily lost his bearings in the monotonous landscape of identical pinyon trees. From there, a single misstep near a sheer cliff edge could have sent him into a deep, narrow fissure, effectively sealing him away from the sightlines of search helicopters and ground teams. However, this logistical explanation carried its own set of frustrating contradictions. To reach these remote canyons from the Spruce Tree House trail, Dale would have had to scale rock barriers or hike a significant distance through dense, painful brush in the blistering heat, all while carrying no survival gear and only a single bottle of water. For a man who had expressed fatigue earlier in the afternoon, such an intense physical exertion seemed highly improbable, keeping the question of his trajectory locked in fierce debate for years. As the years dragged on without a single shred of physical evidence appearing within the park borders, a darker, human-centric hypothesis began to circulate among local investigators and online communities. Some family members and private detectives wondered if Dale had never actually remained in the canyon at all. Because he carried his wallet and identification, a minority theory emerged suggesting that Dale may have chosen to walk out of the park entirely, hitchhiking away from his life on the remote Colorado highways. This theory was occasionally fueled by unverified sightings of a man matching Dale's description, wandering through various small towns in the Southwest, appearing disoriented, or living as a transient. The idea of a voluntary disappearance offered a small, bittersweet comfort, suggesting that he might still be breathing somewhere in the vast desert expanses of the American West. Yet, for those who knew Dale's deeply ingrained sense of family responsibility and his tight bond with his wife, the amnesia or transient hypothesis felt like a logistical stretch that failed to align with his character. Ultimately, the highway predator theory also stalled against the unyielding security layout of the park itself. Mesa Verde features a single, heavily monitored entrance and exit road that sits miles away from the cliff dwellings, making an unassisted exit on foot nearly impossible for a dehydrated man in the middle of summer. Without a vehicle or a collaborator, Dale's journey was fundamentally limited by the harsh physics of the desert, leaving investigators right back where they started, staring at the sandstone walls of Chapin Mesa. The frustrating silence that defined the Stehling case for over 7 years was abruptly shattered in September 2020. A park ranger working on a remote resource management project in a rugged, strictly prohibited section of the park stumbled upon human remains and personal effects deep within a canyon. The location was roughly 4 miles away from the visitor center where Dale had last spoken to his family, a distance that represented an incredibly grueling journey through some of the park's most unforgiving backcountry. Forensic testing quickly confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Mitchell Dale Stehling, providing a grim, clinical closure to the administrative missing persons file. Yet, the physical evidence left behind at the recovery site only served to deepen the existential mystery of his final hours. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, implying that Dale had simply walked until he could walk no further, eventually succumbing to the elements and dehydration in the shade of the desert brush. The ultimate tragedy of Dale's story lies in the terrifying proximity between safety and erasure. He had vanished from a paved, crowded path, only to perish alone in a silent chasm that required years for human eyes to find. Today, the Spruce Tree House Trail still hosts thousands of travelers who look out at the ancient stone ruins, completely unaware of the invisible, thin line that separates a family vacation from the silent expanses of the Colorado desert.